Yeah, I've got an interesting background, I think, for what I do. I was about 10 years in the retail business and another 10 years in the catalog business, and then followed by about 30 years in business to business telemarketing or whatever you want to call it. Um, and, I've learned over the years of, I think, a couple of secrets to success, one of them being data and the other one being persistence. And so I'm sure
Okay.
we'll talk more about that today.
Yeah. And so what do you think is the biggest problem for new sales reps just getting into the corporate world when it comes to prospecting? What do you see they do really well and kind of really wrong?
Unfortunately, it's more on the second half of that question than the first half of the question. But, I think that the sales reps, whether they're brand new or have a lot of experience, they're very hesitant to pick up the phone and make a call. And as a result, they are way too dependent on a couple of things. One is email. Not that email isn't a part of the process, but it's not the process. Um, and then the other thing is, picking up the phone and making calls on a regular basis. I call it persistence with professionalism. And I can't tell you the number of executives that have told me over the years that they got a call from somebody and maybe even a follow-up email, and it sounded interesting, but they happened to be really busy at that moment and couldn't respond. A case in point to that is that we one time found $1 billion deal for one of our clients, and it took 90 days. And he said, well, I've got one of your emails here. I've got saved one of your voicemails. I saved that package you sent me. And it was a combination of 42 touches over the period of 3 months that convinced them that they should talk to my client. And so that's persistence with professionalism. Sometimes people say, isn't 42 touches too many? And I said, no, it's exactly the right number in that
Yeah,
particular
42
case.
seems a bit, 42
Yeah.
seems a bit much for a 3-month period.
Yeah, but it's 42 touches. That includes calls, voicemails, emails, includes
Mhm.
all of the touches. So it wasn't 42 calls, within 3 or 4 days. I know personally, I get calls and emails every day from people trying to sell me what I do. So uh,
Mhm.
they're not spending an awful lot of time pre-qualifying me. If they spent a few minutes on LinkedIn, they'd realize I wasn't a good candidate for their services.
That's right. They just figure, okay, I'm just gonna take a whole bunch of names and numbers and then push the calls, and they do zero research. I've had that happen to me on LinkedIn too. It's like, oh, we want to get you involved in, online courses and online training. I'm like, do you know that I do that already?
Yeah.
They don't care. They just need to target you. So it just shows you professionalism means do some form of research prior to, making these calls and asking for business. And I think people just don't have the patience. Like when they're new, they just, okay, I just need to get my numbers. And sometimes, in a corporate environment, corporate setting, new sales reps are under the gun to perform. So they're pretty much not acting on the right principles. They're acting on, I have to get this deal, I have to get in the door, I have to do this, and I have to do that. Do you find that's like a huge problem as well?
I really do. And I also think, you hit on something that's important, and that is the process. I always talk about the 5 steps in the sales process, and that's to find a pain or need, get agreement that there's a pain or need, get agreement to do something about the pain or need, agree to a generic solution, and then agree to a customized specific solution. The problem in the world today, I think, is that marketing starts and stops at step 1, and sales starts and stops at step 5, and they miss those very important steps 2 through 4 that are critical to the sales process. And so what happens is that they don't have a process. They basically just blindly making calls. There's not a whole lot of training that goes on in many of the situations that I've run across. So they're just kind of sink or swim. If they buddy up with somebody that happens to be pretty good and is having some success, maybe that they get lucky that way. Maybe they don't buddy up with the right person and they're not lucky. So it's just important to start at the very beginning, have a process, follow that process, be persistent, be professional, and over a period of time that will win.
I love it. I love it. So how do you show new reps or entrepreneurs the right way? How do you show them if they're missing those steps?
Well, it's a hands-on experience. We did a meeting last Thursday for a client, and we was tremendously successful. We had 40 prospects that joined us for this 3 hours in the evening last Thursday. But now the secret is, how do you follow up with that? How do you maintain the communication and basically be in front of the right prospect at the right time with the right message. And that just takes time. You know, sometimes it's going to be, you get lucky and you get somebody that's interested and wants to have a discussion today, you know, a bluebird, so to speak. And sometimes it, you know, takes 90 to 180 days. We had one situation, this is a different client than I was talking about a few minutes ago, but we had one situation where over a period of probably some years, it was 2 or 3 years, they went from not willing to outsource to now we're willing to outsource. They were part of another company, they were subsidiary, they had all sorts of services provided to them. Now they're on their own, they don't have those services. And so over a period of time, we stayed on top of that account through the various stages, and that closed for $100,000 a month,
Wow.
3 years in. But another company wouldn't have stayed in front of them, and we just basically were always persistent, always right there. We looked for changes at the executive level. In fact, one of the changes that triggered this becoming an opportunity for a client was that they changed CFOs, and the new CFO was outsourcing positive as opposed to outsourcing negative. And that really helped.
And I like what you just touched on something, which is new CEO. Whenever there's a new hire, I always find that it's always easier to get in the door. Right. Because they want to know what's going on out there, and they're willing to take cold callers, telemarketers, you know, the bad names out there, like new sales reps, or like they're willing to like take that on. So I always like to share with people to remember that as soon as you hear, you know, you're making a cold call, and as soon as you hear someone saying, oh, well, I'm just getting adapted to my new role, I just started 2 to 3 weeks ago, stick with them, call them back, you're going to get a meeting. Like it's just 90% of the time, this is something that I found. And on a different note, like if a company is growing and, you know, building more cold callers to their team, like what is the best way to do that? Like, do you think they should outsource to a call center, or do you think they should build internally their own like team? What would be more efficient? I know I'm kind of throwing this question out. I'm just curious to know your thoughts on this one.
Well, and it's interesting because if anybody is interested, I've got a guide to outsourcing. And so it shows actually the cost differential between insourcing and outsourcing, as well as the effectiveness or the actual results of insourcing versus outsourcing. I think it depends. I think that, you know, what the salespeople would tell you and what the sales manager would tell you is they want to own the resource. They don't want it to be a third party because they don't feel like they have as much control over it. In reality, what happens is that, you know, first telemarketing or outbound calling is centralized in marketing, and then it's centralized in sales. Then salespeople start complaining that they don't have as good a rep as XYZ. The Eastern guy says he doesn't have as good a rep as the Western guy. So then they decentralize it in sales. And then finally sales gets sick of managing it. So they turn it back over and they centralize it in marketing again. That's the pattern that I see. And, you know, the problem with that is that they also, salespeople tend to want to hire hunter salespeople as opposed to beaters. And, you know, it's a totally different mindset, a totally different personality. It's highly likely that the person who's going to become the best hunter for you is definitely not going to be the best beater. You know, look at beating the bushes and looking for opportunities for business by making phone calls. So you have to be careful of that too, that you don't mirror the wrong person and hire the wrong person and not be able to be successful because simply it's a bad hire.
Okay, awesome. No, that's helpful. And if we were to just end off, what would be a couple of, you know, really strong tips or points that you could share right now, other than, I know you mentioned being persistent, politely persistent, professionally persistent. That's what you said, professionally persistent. What else could you close off with? A couple pointers.
A couple of things. One is that I don't think that you should trick people into becoming a lead. You know, what I have said is that the customer experience is being, you know, under a microscope, but the prospect experience hasn't been. So as a result, I think the prospect experience has been bad for prospects. You know, you get pushy appointment setters that close or try to close an appointment under any cost, you know, and you have people that are sending email after email or kind of low-level junior telemarketers reading from a really tedious script. And all of those things turn the market off. You know, what you want to do is turn that around. And I'd say from a personality standpoint, you're looking for somebody who's not especially creative, and they're team players. They like working with other people. And, you know, a lot of times they have a little bit of an artistic flair. And that's totally different than a hunter, you know, who basically is out for the kill. So those are just a couple of things I think to look at.